Hello, hi, welcome to another Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction 2026 video. In this video, I'll be looking at the 8th book from the long list and the final book I have to read from the short list. So there was 5 books that have made it to the short list. This is the 5th one that I've read. So now I've read the whole short list. Still got another 4 from the long list, which I will get through at some point. I'm hoping to get at least a couple of them done before the winner is announced in the middle of June. And yeah, not that I need to have them read before I do sort of my prediction and ranking video, but I like to get a few in just before, and then I can put the Walter Scott Prize to bed for this year and then continue on with some of my Victorian literature, which I haven't done for a while. Anyway, enough of that. This video is all about The Pretender by Joe Harkin. This is, wow. Yeah, like... I am going to struggle when I come to my ranking for the shortlist between this and The Matchbox Girl. I love both of them, but both for different reasons. But I've talked loads about The Matchbox Girl in the video, you can see. But this, yeah, I love this so much. I had a feeling that I might, but yeah, I absolutely adore this. So The Pretenders tells the story of young John Collan. And John is the youngest of 3 boys. He's got 2 older brothers and his father, Will Collan. They live on a farm in a little village. Quaint village life almost. John's quite young. He's, what, maybe 10? He's a young boy anyway at the beginning of the book. And one day, these 2 men come to the cottage where he lives on the farm, and have a word with his dad. By this point, his older brothers have gone off to study or work. So he's now living at the farm with his father on his own. So yeah, these 2 men turn up. They have a secret word with his father, then they leave. And his dad comes and tells him, you know, you're going to be tutored. I've got you a tutor. You're going to go to Oxford. You're going to be, you know, an academic, which John's really happy about. You know, he wasn't really sort of a fighting sort of spirit. Quite innocent, a little bit naive, but what 10-year-old isn't? So he's excited by this prospect. And then these 2 men come back at a later time and whisk him away. And that's where John's life falls apart. Now, I'm going to refer to John as John throughout this video just to make it easier, but John does end up going by quite a few different names. He realises that his identity maybe isn't what he thought it was. I don't want to give too much away, but I mean, from the premise of the book on the back as well, you know that John is said to be the Earl of Warwick, which is cousins to the 2 princes who were in the tower, who were, you know, murdered by their uncle. So yeah, John is meant to be the Earl of Warwick, Edward the Earl of Warwick. And there's this group of people, loyal Yorkists. Now Henry Tudor's taken the throne. They want to kind of mould John, or Edward, John. I said I'm going to stick to John, I'll stick to John. Mould him to be king and take over, you know, depose of Henry the 7th. Depose of him and bring the Yorks back to power. And in the book, we follow his journey on this journey, being used, as one of the quotes in the book says, being used as a political pawn. It's exactly what he's being used as, being sent from person to person. He ends up with his aunt at one stage. They're all trying to build him up for this big battle to take on Henry, and we see how that plays out. And we see him struggling with who he is as well. There's a deeper meaning to the story that I feel, which I'll discuss in a second. So The Pretender instantly hits off with a very humorous tone, but it does have its serious moments, especially near the end, especially when it's giving that message across about identity and oneself and, you know, a journey of self-discovery. But the tone does fit the book really well, that sort of humorous tone. I was laughing in quite a few places. It reminds me, so if I stick to Walter Scott Prize references, of from last year, if the Book of Days and Mother Naked kind of hooked up and had a book baby, this would be what I would expect. It's got some really beautiful language and quite an engaging story, but it's really funny in places as well. So I'd like to read just a passage from the beginning of the book, so hopefully it's not giving anything away, but just to show what I mean about the humour, it's very much my type of humour that I really enjoy. So Jenna, so she actually lives at the farm as well, but she's like a cook, sort of a helper, like a maid of all, like a jack of all trades, but a maid of all trades, if you like. But she does the cooking, she helps out on the farm, doing the milking and stuff like that. So, Jenna, despite being a woman, is not given to womanish fits of crying, especially not concerning the departure of John's brothers. She has blonde hair, thick and unshining as hay, and blue eyes, which she puts down to a Saxon lineage. The twins used to do impressions of her behind her back. All this is just my Saxon lineage, don't mind it, an unbroken line from Alfred the Great, not that I like to mention it. John, hearing but not understanding, asked Jenna why she was a dairymaid if she came from Alfred the Great. A ringing ear, that's why, said Jenna. What? Ow. And there's so much of that in there, and it's just what I find really engaging. But as I said, there's some really serious parts as well, especially when we get to the end. It gets a bit dark, not really dark, but there's a dark undertone as we follow John's journey on his sort of story of self-discovery, and from what happens to him, and we see how he battles against himself and against the people who have done wrong to him. And there's also a moment in the book which I want to mention. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't want to give anything away, but it's on page 102 of the paperback. And it's the first time that I've read in this series of the long list anyway, where I've read along and just been like mouth open, shock moment. Like, it really took me by surprise. Like, a lot of the stories that you read, you can kind of guess where something's going or how a story's, going to end or what's going to happen. But this really took me by surprise. It's right at the end of the chapter 11 on page 102. And it's the bit where it says, "She knows nothing, Maester Richard mouths to Fat Belly, who is looking at him with head cocked." And it's the bit that comes after that where I was like, which I really enjoyed because I haven't had that yet with the series so far in the long list. As I just mentioned there, we've got some really wonderful characters, and what's great is we see them through John's eye, John being a young boy. As I said about Fat Belly, Fat Belly comes along with Thinner as well, that's another character name, until he actually knows these characters' real names. This is how John sees them, and that's how we see them as the reader, which I find really engaging. So the book is split into different volumes, so the chapters are contained within each volume, and the volumes kind of coincide with John's identities as we go through the story, and mark not just a change in his character, but a change in his circumstance and environment. Identity definitely seems to be the prominent theme in this book, and we can see John constantly questioning his own identity. Where did he come from? He was brought up through his whole childhood believing his dad was his dad, and now he doesn't know what to believe. He doesn't know where he comes from. He feels a bit lost, questioning who he is as a person, and that in turn questioning what makes him him, not just the blood and bones, but the morals as well. We tend to believe that we get our morality from our upbringing, and now he's questioning is he really a good person after all, especially as events unfold and what he witnesses and what he himself takes part in, shall we say. It's interesting to watch John go from this innocent soul, with morals, to someone else, but reflecting on his past, wishing he was back in simpler times. As the narrative continues, we see, as I said, John struggling with his ever-changing identities, and it starts to have an effect on his mental health. He starts talking to someone who isn't there, without giving anything away with that. It's his journey is affecting his innocence. So as I mentioned, John is questioning who he is, especially near the end of the novel when he's done some interesting stuff. And I think this passage near the end of the book really sums it up well, how he's struggling with his internal monologue. I'm going to try and cut some bits out so I don't give anything away. But it says, what has he got now? His hatred and his love. It's all he needs. The rest is chaff. Like John said, he's better off without. He should have brushed it off sooner. And yeah, we get, as I say, we get to this point, all he's got is love and hate. And yeah, I can't say any more without giving that away. But yeah, then that changes as well. And yeah, so it's gone from starting this book thinking it's a really humorous, engaging read to actually having a bit of a serious undertone. That it didn't take away the fun aspect of the reading of the novel or of the story, but it just made me think a bit more than maybe I would have done like with Mother Naked. Mother Naked I really enjoyed, this I really enjoyed, but I sat back and thought about John's story, about what he's gone through and how I can relate to that, and actually how it's relatable to a lot of people's lives, not just in, you know, the 1483 when this book starts, but throughout time, how we go through experiences that change us, that make us question who we are, question our morals. Yeah, so it's really interesting to see that play out throughout John, and we see him grow up to be quite a, you know, tactful young man. You know, I believe near the end we see him, he's well into his teen years, 18, 19 probably. So it's interesting to see him playing out from this young boy, see what he goes through and see the end result. The Pretender is a coming of age story, basically, but as I said, it's humorous, it's got some serious undertones, but it's got some beautiful language, and it's full of literary tools as well. And I just want to read just one quick bit, one of my favourite bits of alliteration in the book, where it says, he's as slippery as a strumpet slot. And there's the Mother Naked humour coming through, which, as I said, I really enjoyed. So overall, I really love The Pretender. This is 5 stars for me, absolutely, no doubt. This is going to be contending for my top spot when I do my ranking. Between this and The Matchbox Girl, I love them both. I love them for very different reasons, but also some very similar reasons as well. But yeah, this is fantastic. I don't know what else to say. Have you read The Pretender? What did you think? I think a lot of people that I've seen on like Goodreads, when I've read reviews, everyone's kind of really loved it, which is really unsurprising to me, you know. So yeah, that's my thoughts on The Pretender. That is all of the shortlist done. So yeah, I'm going to crack on with something from the long list next, hopefully get that finished in the next couple of weeks and maybe get another one in before the winner's announced. So that's my thoughts on The Pretender. Thanks for watching. Until next time.